What has happened to Ethiopia? When I visited just 2 years ago, the place was full of energy and optimism. There was a smart and dynamic young leader who had taken charge, and he was opening up the media, politics, and certainly the economy. He was elevating women to high positions of the government and setting the stage for an actual competitive democratic election in a country where the opposition had long been muzzled, suppressed, and just outright driven into exile. It looked like there was a whole new day dawning in Ethiopia. And there was excitement across the world, magnified when this new leader reached out to Eritrea, the very eccentric country on the northern border of Ethiopia, once part of Ethiopia and had gone to war with Ethiopia, reached out to make peace. And with that overture, this new leader reunited families, resumed trade and travel ties, and won the Nobel Peace Prize.
We understood our nations are not enemies, and instead we were victims of the common enemy called poverty. We recognized that while our two nations were stuck on all the grievances, the world was shifting rapidly and leaving us behind.
With his talk of inclusive politics, justice, reconciliation, and economic hope for young people, Abiy seemed to be putting Ethiopia on a solid trajectory. Fast forward to the present, and what do we have? A country dealing with the COVID pandemic, ethnic clashes, and most dramatic, a conflict involving the very people who were running this country for a generation from the far northern region known as Tigray.
This is a very serious situation because we don't see that there is a big response from the humanitarian community, from the different actors to cope with this new big influx of people. These new IDPs, they are arriving with no access to services, no access to water, to sanitation, no food, and no access to medical services.
This crisis matters because Ethiopia is the second most populous country in Africa, has been one of the fastest growing economies as it slays extreme poverty, and occupies a strategic position between Arabia, East Africa, and Europe, symbolized by the fast-rising global air hub at Addis Ababa. Now, these issues are of more than just passing interest to me. You see, I worked for years in Ethiopia as a development strategist for America on issues of governance and human rights, and I traveled all over Ethiopia, even into areas that most Ethiopians had never seen. So when we talk about Tigray, well, I've been to that region and more than once meeting with government officials, community leaders, and the like. It's a beautiful area, by the way, and reminds me of the red rock country of the American Southwest. Let's zero in on the quite powerful role of the United States in this crisis. It's no coincidence that within weeks of America imposing visa restrictions on Ethiopian officials and other sanctions and sounding alarms at the United Nations that Ethiopian forces were leaving Tigray. At the UN, we heard this.
What we need to see is action on the ground. We need to see a ceasefire that is permanent, that all of the parties agree to. We need to see the Eritrean troops return to their own border. We need to see unfettered access for humanitarian workers. We need to see accountability for the atrocities that have been committed.
This war in Tigray is disturbing, costly, and destructive, with a death toll of as many as 50,000 soldiers and civilians, and extensive reports of rape and other violence against non-combatants. The Ethiopian army's hasty withdrawal left more than 6,000 soldiers captured and paraded through the streets of the regional capital, Mekelle. And while this intense fight in northern Ethiopia drew tremendous international attention, as it indeed it deserved, there were other megatrends in Ethiopia that were attracting far less notice. And I think part of the American pressure on the Ethiopian leadership was designed to get them to refocus on some of these key issues. For one thing, America has invested billions of dollars in Ethiopia's turnaround, including around $1 billion in 2020 alone, helping to improve healthcare, governance, agriculture, and education. America is spending about $300 million in relief for the people of Tigray, including food aid. Food security is super high on the agenda. Tigray and northern Amhara were ground zero for the horrible famine of the mid-1980s during another war. Disruptions to farming because of conflict or drought can tip those areas into crisis, and 2 million people right now are at risk in Tigray. Now, while Abiy was pursuing the rebels in Tigray to an inconclusive result, he was also pushing ahead on some significant economic changes in the country. the most important of which is trying to reshape the economy around the internet. And a big win on that front was finally selling a second telecom license for Ethiopia to open up the market and to break the monopoly, the government-controlled monopoly of Ethio Telecom. The winner in that was Kenya's Safaricom in a consortium that's going to invest around $8 billion to build a network in Ethiopia. Now, this is going to be a very challenging task because Ethiopia is over 1 million square kilometers and it's the most rugged terrain in Africa. So it's going to be challenging technically, but the end result is to build a huge new network and to vastly increase competition within telecommunications and the internet and data in Ethiopia. Yet here too, Ethiopia may be facing an American roadblock. While the U.S. Development Finance Agency pledged $500 million for Safaricom's plan, that financing appears to be on hold while the U.S. waits for action on ending the Tigray conflict. Then we come to a symbol of Ethiopia's ambitions that has caused much tension with downstream Egypt, and that's the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam on the Nile River close to Sudan. Ethiopians are proud that they basically self-financed this $5 billion project, the biggest dam in Africa. The reservoir is so big that it creates a major new lake on the map of the country. Now, GERD is supposed to generate enough electricity so Ethiopia can sell the excess to its neighbors. But look, we're also talking about the Nile here, deeply connected to Egypt's history and survival.
Egypt and Sudan's concerns over water security and the safety and operation of the dam can be reconciled with Ethiopia's development needs. This begins with the resumption of productive, substantive negotiations.
Tigray has played an outsized role in Ethiopia's modern history. It was through these mountain passes in Adwa in 1896, 125 years ago, that the soldiers of the Emperor Menelik famously defeated an invading Italian force. And that meant Ethiopia was not going to become a European colony like so many other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. It also made Menelik a global celebrity. And it was in Tigray in the 1980s that an insurgency really began to grow against the communist dictatorship known as the Derg that was controlling Ethiopia at the time and contributing to a terrible famine that took hold in the mid-1980s. And eventually, those Tigrayan forces marched on and seized Addis Ababa in 1991, which led to almost 3 decades of rule by the Tigrayan minority. So why is Tigray again a battlefield? Well, back in November, a few weeks after the conflict started, the Prime Minister responded to questions from Parliament about that. It's a fascinating view into his thinking at the time. He described how the entire military structure of Ethiopia was under the control of commanders from Tigray, and he said Ethiopia was beset by a major ethnic conflict almost every week, intended to sow chaos and orchestrated, he said, by the Tigray junta. And he justified the military operation by citing the American Civil War and Abraham Lincoln's defense of the Republic in the face of a southern rebellion. So how to get Ethiopia back on a path of stability, of economic growth, and of momentum? Well, I think first, political dialogue. You've got to deal with ethnic tensions that have built up really over decades. And you can't do this with some sort of instant deal. This is going to have to be a process that takes place from the very low level, from the village level all the way up to the national level. Process of really talking about issues that have bubbled up and been pent up for quite some time. Issues about economic governance of the country, issues about political rights and about territory and land and all sorts of grievances. It needs to be dealt with very systematically, and it needs to be dealt with the right amount of time. Tigray's leader offered an opening, I thought, in an interview with the New York Times, saying Tigray's future in Ethiopia depends on the politics at the center. The victory of Abiy's Prosperity Party in the June election, which didn't include about 20% of constituencies, those are going to vote later, make it likely the center will remain Abiy. Second, keep opening up the economy, but not just to international investors. Young Ethiopians need an easier path to entrepreneurship and to full participation in this digital economy that's coming. And particularly, there needs to be help and support for women to get fully engaged in that economic opportunity. Third, Ethiopia needs to recommit to international solutions. And Ethiopia has been a leader in this for an entire century, going back to being an historic member of the League of Nations and then becoming a founding member of the United Nations. to being an inspiration under the Emperor Haile Selassie for a whole generation of Africa independence leaders, hosting the African Union, being at the forefront of the green energy revolution, and contributing the first African leader of the World Health Organization. So Ethiopia has just a tremendous record of being at the forefront internationally and being an international player. It can do it again now with water security issues in the Nile by coming to terms with Egypt on the GERD, the big dam. It would be a tremendous step forward, and I think it would have so many benefits for Ethiopia.
Madamar, an Amharic word, signifies synergy, convergence, and teamwork for a common destiny. Madamar is a homegrown idea that is reflected in our political, social, and economic life. At its core, Madamar is a covenant of peace that seeks unity in our common humanity.